It's time for well, actually, it's way past time for the Bible Geek. We had some kind of inexplicable nonsense going on with the computer turning off the camera in some way we couldn't figure out, but I got out of the mothballs and an external camera, and we're using that. So sorry about this. If any of you are still here, I want to get into the question of the development of Christology. Also, I want to make a format change or a schedule change. I believe I would like to go back to one podcast a day at 6 o'clock, and the each would have a theme and a title. It wouldn't just be random question and answers. Ideally, the questions would be on the topic that we will have discussed. Though I am starting that today, but then I guess I will do another at 6 tonight, and then after that they'll all be at 6. And I'm not sure what the next one will be. Perhaps the Trinity. But today it's the development of Christology, which is quite a piece to bite off. Let's see if we can make some sense of it. Well, as I think you know, some early Christians believed Jesus was a supremely righteous man, a human being who, after his ministry was over, his death and resurrection, he had been, some thought it was that late in the game, but either that or at his baptism, perhaps, baptism or resurrection, he had been adopted by God because of his great righteousness as his son. And you find this hinted at in various fragments in the New Testament, such as in Romans chapter 1. There's this intriguing bit. It's funny how, a single sentence, the way somebody decided to put something, may keep theologians busy for centuries. Okay, he says, etc., 1:3 in Romans, the gospel concerning his son, who was descended from David according to the flesh, and designated Son of God in power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. Oh, that's interesting. Then you've got something quite similar in the book of Acts, chapter 2, in Peter's Pentecost sermon. And come on. All righty. Oh boy, what is? Yeah, Acts 2:36. Let all the house of Israel therefore know assuredly that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. That's sort of astonishing. Then over in Acts 14, let's see. I think I have got the right. No, 13. What am I thinking of? Yeah, Paul is going through a whole lot of the Old Testament story of Israel in his sermon there, and he says, 13:32 and following, we bring you the good news that what God promised of the fathers, this he has fulfilled to us, their children, by raising Jesus, as also it is written in the second Psalm, thou art my son, today I have begotten thee. And as for the fact that he raised him from the dead, no more to return to corruption, he spoke in this way: I will give you the holy and sure blessings of David. So you get that? He's saying, you want a citation for the resurrection? Well, how about this one, which says, you are my son, from Psalm 2, with coronation hymn. All right, as of his investiture as the king of Judah. Every king would be read this thing from God. I will tell of the decree of Yahweh. He has said to me, you are my son. This day I have begotten you. Well, so Jesus becoming the son is the same as his rising from the dead. So there were early Christians for sure that thought that, and for some time. And we call them adoptionists, right? I don't think they did at that stage. Later on, there was a similar view, a kind of a revival of that view, which was called adoptionism, but it's pretty much the same thing, so they use the term in a slightly looser way. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, some early Christians believed that Jesus had been a divine spirit who only seemed to appear in human flesh. That's docetism, right, from the Greek word dokeo, to seem. So it looked like you had a real, fellow fleshly human there, but you didn't. He just assumed that guise. And in the Acts of John, you have this fascinating section called the Preaching of John, where the aged John, son of Zebedee, is telling his latter-day disciples what it was like to pal around with Jesus. And he says, well, it's pretty weird. Sometimes we, two of us, like my brother and I, would look at him, and at the same time, he would appear to be totally different people, depending on who you asked. Origen said that too, by the way. He said sometimes if you touched Jesus, it would be like you're touching a steel statue. Sometimes your hand would go right through as if he were just an apparition, which basically he was. Right? Apparition, appearance, right? And when I would walk next to him on the sandy beach, I would happen to look down and notice that he didn't leave any footprints. What? Well, because he's not really there in the flesh, and so on and so on. So some of them thought that, and the writer of the so-called Johannine epistles, actually anonymous, but just credited to the elder, he says, now, if anybody comes to you preaching a doctrine that says that Jesus did not come in the flesh, slam the door. Well, that's what we're talking about here with docetism. So these, I would say, are the two extremes between which, the pendulum is going to have to try to settle in the middle. Now, in other New Testament options, Matthew's gospel, as well as Luke's, seem to picture Christ as a divine or semi-divine being who was supernaturally begotten, but who had no pre-existence, right? He wasn't up in heaven before this. And it wasn't as if the Virgin Mary was simply the vehicle for him to appear among humans. Now, there were Christians that thought that, right? But here, it's just that he's basically a demigod. God has begotten him in some fashion by the Spirit or whatever. And so this is the first anybody's heard of him. He wasn't hanging around in heaven waiting for the time to come. So supernaturally begotten, the virgin birth is all about this, but it seems like he's a brand new creature, sort of semi-divine. I mean, they never really explain that exactly, but usually in myths, when you have somebody that was fathered by a god on a mother, a human mother, you speak of him as half god, half man, a demigod. Well, isn't that the standard view of Christianity? No. The orthodoxy, as we will see, says Jesus was entirely God and entirely man. And the trick is going to be to see how he can be one person with two distinct natures. That's much more challenging than the notion of a demigod like Hercules or Achilles, right? Basically human, but endowed with divine powers. Okay. What do Paul and John say? Well, they certainly seem to understand Jesus on earth to be the earthly appearance of a heavenly being, even divine, if you want to use that word. But what is the precise relation of that being to God, the Creator, the Father, the Lord of all things? That's where it gets tricky, and where well, like for instance, let me just read you one passage. Well, I can just quote it from Philippians 2, chapter 2, verses 6 and following, an old hymn apparently. It said, though he was in the form of God, he did not deem equality with God something to be seized, like to go up even higher, right? But rather laid aside his prerogatives. He emptied himself and took on the form of a servant, an incarnated human being. And so now, what exactly was he before he, when he did come to earth among us, what was he? Well, it says he took on the appearance of the form of a human. So we're not really sure what that means. It has to be defined. And of course, it is not further defined there in the text. What was he before he came to earth? Well, it doesn't really say that either. He was in divine form, or the Greek word morphe, like metamorphosis, you're changing shapes. We don't know exactly what that meant either. I mean, you could say angels were sort of in the form of God, superhuman beings, not made of flesh, but not God. So what's the story? That's really the 64,000 denarii question, I would say. How do you define those? And that's where the history of Christological debate begins. It's crystallized in a series of debates where the ecumenical councils, where they got as many bishops as they could from all over the Roman Empire. And the first one of these, the Council of Nicaea, was called by the Emperor Constantine, himself a Christian. I don't want to get into that when he became one. Some people think he was converted by this vision on the Milvian Bridge and all that stuff. Others say, no, he was born and raised a Christian, though he also occupied the role of the Pontifex Maximus of the Invincible Sun cult, S-U-N. But whatever, at any rate, he knew there was all kinds of strife and unrest in the empire over this question. Now, what exactly was Jesus? What was the Logos? Is it God? Is it a creation of God? Is it an angel? What the heck is going on? I mean, they actually, we're told there were actual drinking songs in the taverns, where I would love to know what they said in these things, like, lifting a mug of ale and saying, "Oh, he's not one with the Father." Can you imagine? I mean, it's got to be something as weird and stupid sounding as that, I guess. Anyhow, it was a big deal. And if they had televised commercials like the ones we hear during election season, it wouldn't be surprising if, with such vitriolic polemics colliding every day, that the emperor would say, "Boy, I am sick of this. We got to get the experts together to hammer out a position paper." So he did. He called all the bishops from all over, and he says, "Now here's what I want you to decide for us. What was the Logos that became flesh, the Word that was made flesh? And maybe we can all agree on that and settle all this." The first round, the one that the big debate that took place at Nicaea um, in 325 CE or AD, there were two different, well, there were more than two factions, but the main two, um, it's like they had a two-party system. There were third parties in there, but they didn't get too many votes. Right, exactly like that. Well, um, the one view was that of Arius, who was a bishop, and he believed that Christ was the divine word, John chapter 1, verse 1, in human flesh. The word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Right. Everybody agreed on that. But what does it mean when it says the word was with God and the word was God? Oh boy. You could translate it grammatically, legitimately, either as the word was God or the word was a God. I won't put you and myself into a coma trying to explain the Greek grammar, but it has to do basically with the fact that if a noun does not have a definite article, the, right, in front of it, that means one of many. Like I belong to a country. I'm not saying the country because I don't need to put it. I can leave it without the article, meaning there's plenty of countries. I'm in one of them. But if I say the country I hail from is the United States of America, well, that makes sense because I've used a definite article. But since God is a predicate nominative, and I'm leaving it at that, it doesn't take, it need not take an expressed definite article, but it can mean that depending on the context. You just didn't bother using one because you figured everybody would know. You mean, oh yeah, that one. We Jews believe in one God, so if we use the word theos, we don't have to bother with theos. But the problem is, what if it did mean a God? Well, it couldn't because Jews were monotheists by this time. Not so fast. The way Philo of Alexandria, Jewish philosopher and Bible expert, put it, he said that God created the world through the Logos, which was something of a projection of himself. In fact, a series of projections, almost emanations, like in Neoplatonism. And the question is, well, it's like a ray of light from the sun. Is the ray of sunlight the sun? Oh, it's made out of the same stuff, but that particular ray of light hasn't been around as long as the sun, the parent entity. So Arius said it means a God in the sense that it was divine. Well, isn't that still asking a lot? I mean, if it says the word was God, what could that mean other than saying, well, we got Zeus here and Apollo here? Well, no, I don't believe that. Well, I said the question is whether the Logos shared the very same nature as God the Father and Creator. And they figured, well, if the word is also the Son, well, the answer is yes. And so the one is just as much God as the other, but they're not two gods. And that's the essence of the debate. How do you figure out exactly what is going on? How can you resolve the ambiguity? Well, I would say you're not supposed to. Just like in the later passages of the Old Testament, where you say, well, God doesn't actually literally live in the Jerusalem temple, but his name dwells there. What do you mean? It isn't God? It's something else? Well, no, it's not something else, but it's not God exactly either. But it's not something else. Wait a minute. Who in the Garden of Eden got down on his hands and knees and grabbed a bunch of clay and shaped it into Adam? You mean to tell me God Almighty, the maker of the universe, whom the highest heaven cannot contain, was like Geppetto creating Pinocchio? No, no, no. God is much too transcendent for that. Well, then who did it? Well, it wasn't somebody other than God. Now, some people said it was, that he had angels do the job, but generally Jews shied away from that. And they said, well, we don't exactly know. It wasn't Jehovah Almighty himself, but it wasn't somebody else. Where do you draw the line, or do you draw a line? We don't know. Of course, this is exactly the way people speak of the Trinity, because it's exactly the same issue, right? And we're on our way to the Trinity with this first round of the Christological um, uh, council. So Arius said the word was a God of a similar nature, but not of the same nature, because he thought it would be denying monotheism if you said the Logos is just as much God as the Father was, different God, of course. No, no, no. That a lot of people agreed with him, but a lot didn't and called it heresy. So he is saying that the Logos, though he was the instrument of creation of everything else, he himself was the first and highest creation. Now, where would he get an idea like that? Well, maybe from Colossians, in which it says that he was the firstborn of creation. Now, people try to get out of that one by saying, "Oh, that just means he had the rule over everything, like the firstborn son inherits the throne." But not that he was firstborn, because he wasn't born on high anyway as a divine being. Oh, no, no. He was eternal. Then why use the analogy of the royal firstborn if you're not actually saying he had a beginning at some point, right? But Arius said, yeah, quite consistent. The Logos was the firstborn of creation through which everything else was created. Now, why did that matter? He said, and as a creation, that meant he was malleable, he was changeable. And that's why in the epistle to the Hebrews, it says that he had to be made perfect in all respects, that he had to be tempted in all respects as we are, though he overcame them. He learned and was chastised, and the problems he had, all the trials, were to perfect him. Well, if he was just God, from day one, before day one, he's already got to be perfect, right? Well, no, it matters that he wasn't, that he had to be perfected, because we are not perfect, no matter how Christian we may be. Now, the common belief between Arius and his opponent, Athanasius, who we'll get to in a second, was that salvation is a matter of human mortals being deified, divinized, raised up and transformed from mortality, perishability, growing old and getting sick and finally dying. That's what we need to be saved from. Well, what about sin? It's all in the same mix, basically. And sin accelerates the degeneration and all that stuff. But how do mortals get made immortal? How do humans become divine? Here's where they differed. Each had a different understanding of how one is saved. And the Arians said Well, what does it say in Hebrews again? That Christ was the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. He was a trailblazer. He showed the way he went. That's how he showed it. And because he overcame, he was given divine glory. So and the difference between nature and grace. Nature is just the way you're born, but by God's grace you may be forgiven, uplifted, empowered, something you couldn't have attained but for God granting it. Well, that's how Jesus became the divine word. It was by grace, not by nature, because he didn't have divine nature, right? Not bad, but not of the same nature as God. I know you've heard the words homoousios, of the same nature. But that's not what Arius thought. He said homoousios, of a similar nature. So he became and inherited all these great titles: Christ, Logos, Son of God, God, in a kind of an honorary fashion by God's grace. He declared him this way, just like in Romans 1, declared Son of God. And since he wound up that way, the New Testament writers are well within their rights to use these in an anachronistic fashion, to call Jesus the Christ, the Word, even God, at the beginning of his ministry. It's shorthand for saying, the guy who was granted the status of God, Son of God, Messiah, etc. That's the one we're talking about. There are plenty of guys named Jesus, but this is the one we mean. So they're calling him these things before technically he had attained them by his perseverance and perfecting, and by God's grace rewarding him. So that's what we do. We follow the way he marked out. Okay, Athanasius said, going back to John 1:1, that the Word was God. He always had the same nature as the Father, and therefore he was not created. There was never a time when the Logos didn't exist. And the Logos is of the same nature and therefore can be said to be God. He always has been. But he did become flesh. And of course, there were trials entailed in that, and pains, obviously, and sufferings and death, though he rose from the dead. Well, his Athanasius, he had a slogan: God became man so that man might become God. It starts out with God, right? The one who gives immortality and divinity to mere humans must be on the divine side. Only God can grant a kind of divinity to those who believe in him. Even if he had created Jesus as Arius said he did, as like the chief archangel, his assistant in creation, he wouldn't have been able to save us the way we needed to be saved, because he himself did not start out as fully divine. So we certainly aren't. Only God can deify or divinize us. And so the Savior had to be God. But of course, he also had to be man, because he has to possess human nature as well in order to impart divine nature on top of it, or to transform the one into the other. He can't give you anything to drink if his bottle is empty, right? So he believed that, yes, the Word was God and had always been God. Wait a minute. the Arian said, doesn't it say he's the only begotten? Doesn't that imply there was a time in which he hadn't existed? And Athanasius said, C.S. Lewis talks about this too, no, because he was eternally begotten. The relation between the Father and the Son was one of dependence. One was contingent upon the other, but it had always been that way. C.S. Lewis said, imagine, if you will, a table in a room, and there are two books on it. One's flat on top of the tabletop, and the other is laid on top of the first book. But it's been that way forever. Well, then how's the position of the one derivative or dependent upon the position of the other? I mean, the one is resting on the other, but it was never put on top. Well, to tell you the truth, if that was the idea, I think that I probably could have come up with a better way of putting it. But nonetheless, that's the Orthodox view even today. Eternally begotten, not temporally. Hoo boy. I guess you could say with a solar thing, Origen used this analogy. It was like light from the sun. Well, there had always been light coming from the sun, or we wouldn't call it the sun, right? So how do we gain divinity from the God-man? Well, through faith, good works, the sacraments, etc. They're imparted to us. The divine nature is communicated to us through these works of worship and piety. So big split. Right? Now, some interesting ideas came up. Those who objected to Athanasius said, look, if they were both eternal, why don't we think of them as brothers rather than father and son? Why, as I was just saying, why use a begetting analogy at all? Oh boy, there were all sorts of backs and forths and appeal to different scriptures. I should say legitimate appeals, where you're not twisting the text. Like I give the Jehovah's Witnesses credit. They are today's Arians. Well, there have been outbreaks of Arianism in modern times before. There was a vogue for this in Victorian England among Episcopal, Anglican rectors and so on. There's this anecdote where this little old lady is shaking hands with the priest as she leaves the service one day and said, Father, come to think of it, I've never heard you preach a sermon on the Trinity. And he said to her, and you never will. But they didn't make a big deal out of it. Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses do, and they appeal to these passages I've mentioned in Colossians and John and so on. I personally think they have the better argument there. I think they were able to just look at it afresh, saying that, like Charles Taze Russell did, if I'm saying that right, I don't know, the old Taser, I guess they call him. He, like Joseph Smith, was taking a fresh look. He's trying to take the blinders off. I know what they say this means, but what else might it mean? I think it's more likely that it means this. Well, I have a lot of respect for that. I mean, there are things about the witnesses I really cannot sympathize with, but they certainly are sticklers for a strict morality, and they've got a lot of guts. I mean, in my old teenage fundamentalist days, DAZE, I did some door-to-door evangelism. Oh boy, that takes some guts to do, and they got them. So I admire them for that. Oh, in fact, you might enjoy reading Jason Bedune, it's capital B, E, capital D, U-H-N, Truth in Translation, where he takes about 10 or a dozen different translations of the Bible and compares them all at certain passages, about as many, I guess, 10 or 12, maybe more, I forget. And he says, now, here's what the New American Standard, the Revised Standard, the King James, the New World Translation, et cetera, et cetera. Here's how each one translates it. Which one is closest to the seeming meaning of the Greek? And time and again, it's the Jehovah's Witnesses and so forth. And I can't disagree. The Arians are still around, and they're a major religion in their own right, just succeeding well all over the world. Okay, so what happened at the Council of Nicaea? Well, they had the vote, and they decided that Athanasius was right. At least the majority did. That didn't mean everybody, right? In fact, there was a significant minority who said, sorry, we're not convinced. Guess we'll have to live and let live. But it wasn't that easy to do. And oddly enough, Athanasius's victory was soon overturned, and Arianism became the official doctrine. But then the wind changed, and Athanasian doctrine was restored. And what happened, it's almost ridiculous to say that when Athanasian doctrine fell out of favor, Athanasius had to pack his bags and get out of town. But then he got welcomed back, and Arius had to split. That's funny. At least they didn't put him to death. So that was 325 AD or CE. But that's only round one. The second one took place in, I think I know what this is, 431? No, 381. Good God, good thing I looked. This one was occasioned by the preaching of a disciple of Athanasius named Apollinaris, or if you prefer, Apollinarius. It's spelled either way. I guess the Greek allows for either one. But Apollinaris taught that he said, well, my teacher, Athanasius, was right, but I think a bit remains to be explained. Let's see, Jesus was human, but what did that mean? Was he just like wearing a kind of a zip suit, like a scuba diver made of human flesh, but he was divine on the inside? Or what? I mean, did it get crowded in there? Was Jesus some kind of a multiple personality, or what? Well, here's what Apollinaris came up with. He said, okay, he had a body of flesh, but he didn't have a human soul. Well, how could that be? Well, you had to put the Logos somewhere. And so instead of a human consciousness, soul, he had that of the divine Logos. So body of flesh, yes, but not the whole equipment of a human being. And this riled up a trio of boyhood chums who had all become ecclesiastical bigwigs in the meantime, who all lived in Cappadocia, a province of Asia Minor. In other words, on today's maps, it would be in Turkey, though they weren't Turks. That's the result of a later population shift. They were all Greeks. And so these guys were Gregory of Nazianzen, one town in Cappadocia, Gregory of Nyssa, another one, Nyssa, and Basil of Caesarea, a name for one of the Caesars. And they put their heads together and said, I think Apollinaris has gone off the deep end here. There's something wrong here. What is it? Well, they came up with a slogan to succinctly clarify their belief. They said, what is not assumed, that is taken upon oneself, is not redeemed. In other words, salvation is the man, Jesus, who was divinized by the grace of God, um, taking on humanity to impart divinity to us, with it immortality. Well, how could he have saved the whole human organism, psyche, everything, if he didn't have one? I mean, if he had been physically bodiless, a phantom, that wouldn't have worked either. And for the same reason, the human being is an integrated whole of different parts made of different kinds of stuff. Well, to redeem a whole human being, the incarnate Logos must have included the whole gamut of the human being, not just a scuba diving suit of human flesh, right? And so that logic prevailed at the Second Ecumenical Council, which was in 381. Like, these guys just couldn't stop arguing. I think I would have really enjoyed that, because I love theological arguments. Let's just ask my evangelical buddy, John Lowe. Okay, let's see. Yeah, this was settled at the debate, and then the vote was at the Council of Constantinople, or today's Istanbul. And before it was Constantinople, it was called Byzantium, but it's all the same place. And so the Cappadocian Fathers got the blue ribbon, and so their view became orthodox. I am not sure that any organized body holds to Apollinarianism, though some individuals have occasionally unearthed it. And I suspect a whole lot of people believe in it without ever knowing what they're supposed to believe officially, and not knowing who framed it first. In fact, I used to ask my theology students at Mount Olive College, we would go over this stuff, and I said, okay, I'm betting all of you are heretics. And having explained these different options, I said, what would you consider yourself? Which one of these best describes what you think? Docetist, adoptionist, Arian, et cetera, even the ones we haven't gotten to yet. And so they would say, well, I guess I'd be a Docetist, or I'd be a Monophysite, or whatever. That kind of describes what I've come up with. And I think Martin Marty used to agonize over this, a great historian and theologian. He wrote a lot in the 60s and 70s. He was like chiding the denominational bigwigs to teach your heritage is theology. Most people, like Presbyterians, aren't supposed to believe in reincarnation and stuff like that. Well, I kind of agreed with him. And when I was a Baptist pastor, though I was, a heretic in other ways, I would have sessions with young people and say, let's go over the stuff we're going over now. Theories of the atonement, theories of Christology, et cetera, because it's up to you whether you're going to embrace your inherited faith or not. I'm not telling you to believe it, but I do think you owe it to yourselves to know what your tradition is, so you can make an informed choice about it. So that's my approach to catechism. I wish more clergy had enough confidence in their theology and in their parishioners to at least do that. Say, you make up your own mind, but here's what our tradition says. Don't see how that would hurt anything. You might have more people saying, well, it's up to me, then the hell with it. Well, still, the people that did believe in it would really believe in it. You probably have a better pool of people there. Okay, now for the third round. In this corner, this is Nestorius versus Cyril of Alexandria. And this is an especially interesting one. Nestorius was a bishop who one day heard outside his residence a bunch of pious Christians praising the Virgin Mary, calling her the Theotokos, the God bearer, or the Mother of God in common parlance. And he thought, what? This is not like what is it, Athena and Hercules. Here, what are you saying? Mary is a goddess? Well, some people probably still think that. Jung said that she had kind of become the unofficial fourth person of the Trinity. Let's see. His thinking was, he says, look, God is not a baby 2 or 3 weeks old. I mean, what do you think? Picture the household of Joseph and Mary. Joe, it's time for God's 2 a.m. feeding. How about you take it this time? Oh, Joe, it's time to change God's diaper. Give me a break and you do it this time. And that's absurd. It's almost blasphemous. But then there was a pretty good rejoinder to Nestorius. I said, hey, you find that disgusting and scandalized, right? But would you say that about the crucifixion? That, oh, God can't die on the cross. That's disgusting and degrading. Well, that's what Muslims thought and why they don't believe Jesus was crucified. Right? So the rejoinder that Cyril of Alexandria came up with was that, yes, you can say that all of those degraded, debased elements other than sin were suffered by the incarnate God, Jesus Christ, because that's what incarnation means. He takes on the whole sorry lot of humanity in order to lift us above it. And so you're thinking of something very different. We're not exactly sure what Nestorius thought. We have an idea because somebody did finally discover one of his unincinerated writings called The Bazaar of Heraclitus. I don't know what the point of that was, but it's not that clear. But here's what at least they thought he was saying and what they were responding to. Nestorius was supposed to have believed that Jesus Christ really was 2 persons, human, that is, Jesus of Nazareth, and divine, the Logos, and they were in moral unity. They agreed in purpose and will. There was not one person. And I guess a good Bible passage to sum up this view might be in the Gospel of John. This is why my Father loves me, for I always do that which pleases him. I mean, that's not the whole thing, but that's kind of on the way to Nestorianism, that there are 2 persons, but united by will and purpose. That's problematical, though, because are you saying Jesus was like a dual personality? That there were 2 of them locked up in there? That he was benignly insane, you might say? Or maybe that he was just like Isaiah or Jeremiah, hearing a voice from God, and so that Jesus is a prophet. And you're saying it in a fancy way. Well, Cyril of Alexandria, there are a few Cyrils, it gets confusing. He argued that Jesus was a single person with 2 natures, one divine, one human. and that of the two, the person was divine. So there is one divine person who holds, of course, a divine nature and a human nature. And another way of saying this is that there was a person, Jesus of Nazareth, right? Well, which side of the duality contributes the person? Well, it's the divine side. And another way of putting this is that there would have been no Jesus if not for the incarnation. There would have been the Logos anyhow, but if God hadn't decided to save the human race and to have an incarnation, there wouldn't have been a human person, Jesus, at all. Of course, there was, and so this human being is there for the sake of the divine nature that he shares along with his human nature. This doctrine is sometimes called the impersonal humanity of Christ, that he was a person. He could have a conversation with you. He must have had likes and dislikes, stuff like that. But there wouldn't have been this person if not for the Word needing to become incarnate. Let's see. Sometimes the Nestorian view is called a word and flesh incarnation, not a word and man incarnation. That would be a kind of a type of adoptionism, right? But a bit different. Now there are, they had a big debate, and this one took place at the Council of Ephesus, the famous biblical town. And this was in 431 AD. But this time, they didn't just pick up their marbles and go home. There was a major split. You had, this was the origin of the Monophysite churches. Monophysite means, there are, the Nestorians still exist today, though some of them must have changed their tune. I used to drive by a Nestorian monastery on the way to the school I taught at, and there was a big sign saying, Feast of the Theotokos, the Mother of God. Whoa, wait a minute, I thought those were fighting words. Some of them changed their mind, but there still are Nestorian churches in Iraq, for instance. Now we get to the Monophysites. Sorry about this. Okay, there's a guy named Eutyches. He's not the same as the one in the book of Acts, where they're the kid that falls asleep while Paul is endlessly droning on like me. And he falls out of the window of the second or third story, and Paul has to run down and resurrect him. That's Eutychus, which means Mr. Lucky. Eutyches means the same thing, but it's just got an ES instead of a US at the end of it. He was some sort of monk, I think. He was trying to explain, okay, I got you. He's one person, and he's got two natures, one divine and one human. But that sounds kind of odd, like he's the only one that has that. How are they together? How are they related? Do they just coexist? What? And so Eutychus said, okay, here's what must happen. The divine and human natures are logically distinct up until the point of the incarnation. That is, the miraculous conception of Jesus in the womb of Mary. That's the point where the incarnation happens. And as of that moment, the hitherto separate divine and human natures fuse into one, a unique Christ nature, or some would put it, the divine nature subsumes the human nature. But it almost doesn't matter. It's like saying there is one nature unique to Christ, composed of the fusion of the divine and human natures. Well, Pope Leo and others, obviously in Rome, Pope Leo said, no, that's not going to work because, well, I'm not exactly sure of all his arguments against it, but here's what he said. He proposed a better model. It was important for him to say that Jesus Christ was God and man. He didn't like the idea that they were fusing into some other third thing, right? Tertium quid, is that right? With that. Here's the great analogy. It's like you could put, like, and what Eutyches is suggesting is you get a jar of water and sprinkle a bunch of salt in it and stir it up. And then you drink it and spit it out because it's undrinkable, right? It's salt water. It's formed a third thing, and one you don't like. It's not drinkable water anymore. It's not salt you could sprinkle on your steak or whatever. That's not what happened in the incarnation. No. Leo in his manifesto, Leo's tome, said, no, it's like oil and water. You can put some of each into the same beaker, and you can even slosh it around, or we would say put it in a blender. You're going to wait from now to doomsday. You will never find the two mixing. I mean, they might be shaken into rival bubbles, right? But the two will not fuse. You'll be able to tell holding them up at the light. Oh yeah, it looks sort of like a lava lamp, right? You would be able to see, yeah, there's the oil and there's the water. They're just not going to mix, and that's the way it is in Christ. They are distinguishable. Now, you can't get a molecule of air in between the oil and the water. They butt up directly against one another, but they're not mixing. And that's the way it is with Christ. Two distinct natures. He is God and he is man. And should we say never the twain shall meet? No, they meet all right, but they don't devour one another or fuse together. Yeah, all right. Well, this was the origin of monophysitism, one-natureism. And there are loads of monophysite churches over in the East, and of course transplants here in the West. Like the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Orthodox Church. Often they use the whole thing, Apostolic or Orthodox Church. The Armenian, the Ethiopian, the Coptic, and various other Eastern churches, they hold to Monophysitism, and they are not in communion with the Orthodox, the Anglicans, the Protestants, or anything. They have their own thing going there because of the difference in Christology, and since it's sort of like continental drift. You know, when Australia broke away from the main continent of Gondwana, it had evolution proceeded along a separate path there. So you had marsupials and so forth there you didn't have elsewhere. Well, this is like the Monophysites, like the theological marsupials. They developed along a different trajectory. And one thing was keeping the one nature Christology. Another was that they had the freedom to have a bit of a different canon in their Bibles. There are 88 books in the Ethiopian canon, including some of the Apostolic Fathers, including the Book of Enoch and all kinds of good stuff. And then and you can get a copy of this on Amazon. Then the Armenian church has Third Corinthians, which was part of the Acts of Paul, which didn't get in. But that's fascinating. I just think, of course, Catholics have 14 books or parts of books that Protestants don't have in the Old Testament. And and there's other minor variations. But this gives us four different basic types of Christianity before Orthodoxy and Catholicism split in the 11th century, and much less before Protestantism separated in the 1400s, I think it was. So there are various Christianities, and yet earliest Christianity, including all the Gnostic and other groups, made this look monolithic. There have always been loads of different types of Christianities, and one of the big reasons for that is differences in Christology. Well, all righty. Let's see what we have in the way of the questions here. Tony John D. Nicola said, "Are you a Trinitarian?" No, I respect the doctrine, but I tend to think it's like a compromised doctrine on paper. It's just a solution. Well, we don't want to be known as polytheists. We want to be monotheists like our cousins, the Jews. But we don't want to deny that Jesus is God and so is the Holy Spirit. So I think it could just be a deep divine mystery, unfathomable by mortals. I mean, if you're talking about God, it's going to be that way anyhow. But it might just be a bad theory, and I tend to think the latter, just a clumsy rationalization. But I will not make jokes about it or anything. And let's see. Graham Pong says, was the main point of developing Christology is to have a metric by which to condemn others as heretics and destroy them? I don't think so. I think they're all genuine differences in theological reasoning. And there were plenty of times when they just didn't have intercommunion. You couldn't take communion together, which is regrettable. Sort of contradicts the whole purpose of the thing, I think. But they weren't always at war or trying to burn each other at the stake. Those were horrible anomalies that came up too often, but I don't think that was the reason. And let's see. Is outsourcing that, well, it wasn't really God who made Adam like Howdy Doody, a ventriloquist dummy. I see nothing wrong with God outsourcing work to the angels. Isn't that why God created them after all? Presumably, yeah, but I guess it was the fact that it says God did this stuff. Yahweh himself appeared in the burning bush and all that. And they thought, boy, that sounds a little crude. That doesn't picture God as transcendently as we've come to believe in him. So they did this kind of retreat into ambiguity. But if it hadn't just credited it to God point blank, there wouldn't have been any problem. But they didn't want to say the angels. I've always thought it was heretical in the Carpenters song from the 60s. The angels got together and decided to create a dream come true, and that was you. And all. Oh, the angels aren't supposed to have created. Right? So, what the heck? Constellation Pegasus. is responding to an omitted comment by Wesley Curry, who apparently said something about the long ending of Mark, chapter 16, verses 9 through 20, and something about textual criticism. I'm not sure. But Constellation Pegasus says things like Mark 16, 9 through 20 undermine the New Testament. Let's see. Following Truth says you must understand biblical agency, working through another, in order to understand the angel of Yahweh and Yahweh in the burning bush. Yeah, those are prime examples. Okay, well, that's good. I will see you tonight, and I want to bring up the doctrine of the Trinity there, and I hope there'll be more questions on that. I want to go through how it developed as far as we know, and what it seems to mean. And we'll have plenty of question answering. And again, starting with tomorrow, I'm gonna, at least for the present, drop the noon show and make the 6 o'clock Bible Geek thematic, like this, one topic, and then questions about that. And of course, we're continuing to do the Gnostic Sabbath on Saturdays at 4. Okay, thanks for being with me.